Namaste, this is Aparna Bhatt and welcome to my YouTube channel Abhigya Law Series. Today in this video, I will be discussing some practice questions in Code of Civil Procedure, that is CPC, for Civil Judge Prelims examinations. So in my previous videos, I have discussed some of the prelims tips, prelims examination preparation tips, and there I had mentioned that I would be releasing a series on preliminary examination preparations. So this is a part of such series and let's begin. So these are some of the practice questions which you can take them as your reference, and I would also be discussing regarding how to prepare notes for such sections and some of the model questions which have been asked in the earlier question papers. So these are the various types, and this is part 1, and I will be continuing regularly with these type of videos. So if you want to join me in this preparation, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. So let's not delay, let's begin. So the first question, this is a question under section 34 of CPC. So what does it say? Under section 34 of Civil Procedure Code, court can award interest from the date of decree to the date of payment or such earlier date as the court thinks fit. So rate of such interest shall not exceed per annum. Friends, this is a question. So you have certain options here which I'll show you later. But first let's understand what section 34 is. So section 34 speaks about interest. So interest which can be awarded by the court during the time of judgment or decree. So section 34 is all about. So what's the question all about? Here in this present question asks you about what's the maximum interest the court can award from the date of decree to date of payment. Okay, so section 34 says that if a court has to award a decree, award an interest in a decree, such decree must be for payment of money. Okay, so the suit must be for payment of money, or it should be a money suit, and the decree should be for payment of money. And generally the court can award interest in 3 cases. So interest can be awarded. First one, interest which has been accrued prior to the institution of the suit, prior to the filing of the suit. That's the first case. And the second case is that the rate of interest from the date of suit to date of decree. That's also known as interest pendente lite. Okay, this is the second case. And the last case is the rate of interest from date of decree to date of payment. So this can also be called as further interest which can be awarded by the court. So the interest is always awarded on the principal sum adjured. So I think you can see this highlighted section, the principal sum adjured. So always interest can be awarded on this. So section 34 says regarding all these 3 types of interest. So the interest can be awarded. It's not a compulsory thing. It can be awarded at the discretion of the court. If the interest has to be awarded by the court will see for which stage should it impose the interest. So here, as I have already told you, there are 3 types of interest. The rate of interest prior to the institution of the suit, rate of interest from the date of suit till the date of decree, that is during the course of the suit which the interest has accrued, that could be awarded by the court, and the rate of interest after the decree, that is it can be calculated from the date of decree to date of payment, or it could be earlier date which could be fixed by the court. Okay, so these are the 3 types of interest. So the further interest which I have told you, that is in the case of the third case. So the further interest is the interest from date of decree to date of payment or earlier date which could be fixed by the court. Okay, so our question is regarding this, the third case. This is a case. So what is the maximum rate of interest which can be awarded from the date of decree till date of payment on the principal sum adjudged by the court? So this is a question in brief. So how much? What is the maximum rate of interest? It is actually the 6% per annum on principal sum. Okay, I'll make it to you very clear that this is not absolute. There are certain exceptions. So you have to read the entire section and you have to make the notes accordingly, point wise. There is no need to write down the entire section, but it's sufficient if you note down these points and ingredients of the section. So till now we know that 6% per annum on principal sum is the maximum rate of interest, maximum rate of further interest which can be awarded by the court. But there are certain exceptions. If it is in the case of a commercial transaction, the rate of further interest can exceed 6% per annum, but it should not exceed contractual rate of interest. Okay, and the contractual rate, if it is not mentioned or if it's not there, then the rate of interest must not exceed the rate of interest prescribed by the nationalized bank. So the nationalized banks give loans at a particular rate of interest. So it must, our rate of further interest must not exceed that rate, but it can exceed 6% per annum. So this is the general exception provided to the main rule that maximum 6% per annum of further interest can be awarded by the court from the date of decree to date of payment. Please remember, this is not the rate of interest from the date of suit to date of decree. This is the rate of further interest from the date of decree till the date of payment. Okay, please remember that. And this is not absolute. There are certain exceptions. If it's a commercial transaction, the rate of further interest may exceed 6% per annum, but it must not exceed the commercial rate of interest or contractual rate of interest. Suppose the decree does not mention about anything, it does not award further interest, then you cannot go and file a suit, a separate suit for rate of further interest which you are entitled to. So that cannot be done. So this is what the entire section 34 says about, and it also gives certain explanations and in some detail it could be there, and there could also be some state amendments which you have to refer according to your states. But generally we can say that 6% per annum is the maximum rate of further interest if it is not a commercial transaction. Okay, so this much we have understood about section 34. So let's return to a question. This is what the question is all about. Let's see what are the options. Okay, see here they have given 9%, 10%, 6% and 12%. So what's the correct answer here? Please make a guess. As I have already told, they have nowhere mentioned this is a commercial transaction. So the maximum rate of interest which can be awarded is 6% per annum. So the correct answer is C, that is 6%. I think you all are clear with this concept, that is section 34, that is regarding interest. Let's move on to the next question, question number. Okay, what does it say? Any amount which a court will order to be paid as compensatory costs in respect of false or vexatious claims or defenses shall not exceed the amount of. So this is one question where the options are given, but I won't move on to the options all of a sudden. Let's discuss what is this question about. Which section does it say? Compensatory cost in respect of false or vexatious claims. Please have a BERAC with you, CPC BERAC with you, and find it which section or which order says about this? Which section discusses regarding the granting of compensatory costs in respect of false or vexatious claims or defenses? So, if we search in the index section, we can find that section Section 35A speaks about Section 35A speaks about compensatory costs in respect of false or vexatious claims or defenses. So, how the court can award interest? Similarly, the court can also award costs. That has been discussed in Section 35. Those are regarding general costs. But Section 35A is all about providing compensation for such type of suits where false allegations, false defenses or vexatious claims have been made and it has been rejected or abandoned or withdrawn. Totally we can say that some groundless defense or claim has been made and it has been rejected. So to provide compensation to the other party, some costs will be imposed on such wrongful persons. Okay, so the question is, what's the maximum amount? What's the maximum amount of cost or what's the maximum amount of compensatory cost which can be awarded in these type of false suits? Okay, so this is section 35. Read the entire section. Pause this video and read the entire section. Let me discuss it. See, this section is applicable to either a suit, it could be a proceeding, and such proceeding will include the execution proceeding also. So, either suit or the execution proceedings. Section 35, that is compensatory cost can be awarded by the court. But it's not applicable to certain types of cases. Which are those? So these are not applicable to appeals or revisions. Okay. So be clear. It's applicable only to suit proceedings or execution proceedings, whereas it's not applicable to appeals or revisions. Okay. What are the ingredients for which the court must be satisfied so that it can award compensatory costs? So first of all, there must be some claim or some defense, okay, and such claim or defense must be false or it must be vexatious. So that's the first ingredient which has to be fulfilled. The next ingredient is, for such claim or defense, there must be objection by the other party, and that objection must be known to this original party which has made a false claim. Okay, so the second ingredient is, for such claim or defense, for such false claim or defense, the other party or the objector must have objected and that objection must be known to the party who has raised the claim or defense. The third ingredient is, such claim must be proven groundless or it must be disallowed or it must be withdrawn or it must be abandoned by the party. So the entire claim can be withdrawn or in part. So the entire thing what we say is, the claim or defense must be either abandoned or withdrawn or disallowed in whole or in part. So if any claim or defense is of such a nature that it fulfills these three conditions, then the court may at its discretion can award compensatory costs. Okay. So what's the maximum amount of cost which can be imposed? So it is maximum 3,000 rupees, or it must not exceed the pecuniary limits of the court. So it could be either rupees 3,000 or pecuniary jurisdiction of the court, whichever is less. So if the pecuniary jurisdiction of the court is up to 2000 rupees, then the court cannot award more than 2000. So generally, I am saying it generally, the pecuniary jurisdiction of the court. Overall, we must understand that whatever it could be, the compensatory cost which can be awarded by the court for false or vexatious claims or defenses must not exceed rupees 3000. So that's the answer. Although cost is awarded as a compensation, as a punishment it has been awarded, but it does not absolve the other party who has made the false grounds from criminal liability. So he may be punished, he may be taken under due course of law in criminal jurisprudence. So that has nowhere connection with this awarding of compensatory costs. So this is I don't say that this is important, but this is one of the important point in the section which you must be knowing. So if cost is awarded, it does not absolve the wrongdoer from criminal liability. Suppose the person who has been awarded compensatory cost, he wants to file a subsequent suit for damages for false suit. Then earlier this cost has been awarded, so that may be adjusted and taken into account and the suit may be proceeded with. Okay, so the important thing which you must be understanding is it must fulfill three conditions and the maximum amount which it can be imposed, or the maximum amount which can be imposed is rupees 3000. So let's return to our question and see the options. The options are, okay, see, it has been given either as 2000, 3000, 4000 or 5000. So what's the correct answer here? It is B, that is 3000 rupees or the amount within its pecuniary jurisdiction, whichever is less. Okay, are you clear with question 2? Okay, let's move on to further question. Okay, this is a question under section 148A. So what's the question? A caveat lodged under section 148A, subsection 1, shall not remain in force after the expiry of. So generally what can we deduce from this question is, what's the time limit for caveat? Okay, let's see and understand the section. Section 148A speaks about right to lodge a caveat. So when can a caveat is filed? So when a person is apprehending that some application may be filed against him in a suit or a proceeding, so that suit may be already instituted or which may be instituted in a future date, but he finds or he apprehends that he is in a fear that some interim order may be obtained against him. The other party may go and obtain temporary injunction against him or some other interim order against him, and he is fearing that, he is expecting that some application and some adverse order may be made against him. So in such a situation, he is having a right to lodge a caveat. So who can lodge a caveat? So it could be any person who has a right to appear before the court, and when the court hears the application, he must be having such right to appear. So some random person cannot go and file a caveat, but the person who is lodging a caveat must be having a right to appear before the court during the time of hearing of such application. Whenever a person is filing a caveat, he must serve a notice of caveat through registered post acknowledgement due. So he has to serve a notice of caveat to the applicant. Okay, that is through RPAD, what we say in short form. And when the applicant gets the notice of caveat, he may provide the copy of the application and the supporting documents at the caveator's expense. So whenever the application is filed in the court, then the court must not give any order without serving notice to the caveator. So the notice of application must be given to the caveator. Without that, the court cannot pass any adverse order or any order against the caveator when the application is filed by the applicant. What's the time limit for caveat? So this was the question and we find the answer here. The time limit for caveat must not exceed 90 days from the date of filing caveat. So the caveat gets expired after 90 days. So either it has to be renewed or the application must have been heard or some other action might have been taken. But for one caveat, the expiry period is 90 days. So that you must be knowing. Now we'll move on to question number 3 and see the options. Okay, there are different number of days which have been given: 30 days, 45 days, 60 days and 90 days. So what's the correct answer here? It is 90 days. Okay. So this is regarding caveat. Next question. Okay, documents which are meant for cross-examination of a witness of the other party may be produced. Let me show you the options here. Till settlement of issues, after settlement of issues, any time when required, or along with pleadings. So generally what is the question is all about? During cross-examination, if any documents are to be tendered to the witness, can that be allowed? Or the documents have to be produced before issues only, before settlement of issues, or whether it can be permitted after the settlement of issues also. So this is a general question which has been asked. Which is the section, which is the provision for this production of documents? Let's check with the section or order. Order 13 Rule 1 says about original documents to be produced at or before settlement of issues. Okay. So don't come to a conclusion. You know the options, but do not come to the conclusion unless you read the entire section or order. Okay. See, what happens is, under Order 7, Rule 14, the plaintiff must produce all such documents which he relies upon during the presentation of the plaint. So that could be in the form of copies, the copies of the documents. Original need not be submitted, but it could be provided at the time of the presentation of the plaint. Who has to do this? This has to be done by the plaintiff. Order 8 Rule 1A says that the defendant has to produce the documents along with written statement. So in both the cases, these are not originals. They could be copies or originals, but generally the copies are produced along with plaint or written statement. Okay. But what does Order 13 Rule 1 says? It says that original documents have to be produced. Whatever documents you are producing to the court, if they are original, then you have to produce them it means at the time of issues, at the time of settlement of issues, or before the settlement of issues. So totally it means that after the settlement of issues, after the court has passed with the stage of the settlement of issues, you cannot produce original documents. So does that mean during the cross-examination original documents can be produced or tendered to a witness? Till now, if we read, it cannot be done so. It has to be produced before the settlement of issues. But Order 13, Rule 1 has certain exceptions. Okay, so what are those? Documents can be produced for the cross-examination of the witness of the other party, and also which are handed over to witness merely to refresh his, or which are handed over to a witness merely to refresh his memory. So these are the two situations where the documents may be produced even after the settlement of issues. Okay, so during the cross-examination of the witness, the original documents may be tendered to the. Let's move on to our question number 4, where it's asking documents which are meant for cross-examination from witness of the other party may be produced. So what's the answer here? A and B are not the answers, but it is any time when required, because the reason is that this is for cross-examination. If the case was for some other during the presentation of a plaint or written statement, then the answer would be A or B, but during cross-examination there are certain exceptions and documents can be produced. Let's move on to question number 5. Where the appellant has withdrawn the appeal preferred against a decree ex parte, the applications under Order 9, Rule 13 shall be. Let's see the options. It could be either rejected, either returned, either maintained, or referred for opinion of appellate court. Look, Order 9, Rule 13 is very important in the perspective of examiner. So most of the times they will be asking the questions on ex parte decree, setting aside ex parte decree and everything. Let's analyze this section. What does it say? Order 9, Rule 13 is all about setting aside ex parte decree. Okay, what has happened in this case? What has happened actually is a case has been filed, a suit has been filed, a defendant does not appear, so an ex parte decree has been passed against that defendant. Okay, so what can defendant do? What remedies does he have? So defendant can apply to the court which has passed decree stating that he has to give certain reasons for his non-appearance, stating that please set aside that ex parte decree. I want to continue with this suit. Don't pass a decree against me. Don't pass an ex parte decree against me. I was prevented from appearing for certain reasons, and that reasons must be satisfied by the court. And if it's satisfied, then the court will set aside the ex parte decree and it will proceed, and it will appoint a day for proceeding with the suit. It will give a day saying that okay, I'll continue with the suit. I won't dismiss or disallow this suit. Okay. So here an ex parte decree has been passed against the defendant, and the defendant has now appeared, and he states, he again files an application under Order 9, Rule 13 stating that I want to apply to court which has passed a decree saying that please set aside the ex parte decree passed against me. So what all grounds can he give? He cannot give any random reasons or grounds for his non-appearance. He can give only two reasons, that is, summons was not duly served upon him. He was not known that there is a case against him. So the first reason is summons was not duly served, and the second ground could be he was prevented from some sufficient cause for appearing. He could not appear because he had some sufficient cause. He couldn't. He had some major reason for that. So he has to prove those. So if such grounds are proved and it has been satisfied by the court, then the court will order for setting aside and fix a day for proceeding with the suit. This is a general thing which happens in the court. Suppose an appeal has been preferred. Here, this was an application which was filed. This could be an internal application. Till here, we discussed regarding the application under Order 9, Rule 13. Suppose an appeal is preferred against ex parte decree in appellate court. So already the defendant has preferred an appeal against the ex parte decree and the appeal has been disposed of. Okay. Then again he cannot file an application under Order 9 Rule 13 stating that please set aside the ex parte decree. Okay. So this is what the law says. He cannot take two recourses simultaneously. He can also not file an application. He can also not file an appeal, and he cannot confuse the court by doing all these actions. So what can he do is either he has to file an application, or if an appeal is already preferred, then it has been disposed, then he cannot file an application under Order 9 Rule 13. But again, this is not an absolute rule. There is an exception here again. What does it say? If appellant has withdrawn the appeal, this is an exception to this provision. So what does it say? If appeal is disposed of, no application under Order 9 Rule 13 can lie. But if appellant himself has withdrawn the appeal, then he can file an application under Order 9 Rule 13. He can file an application although he has filed an appeal. So this is a very important exception, and upon this exception the question has been asked, which we are seeing now. So let's see that. Okay, so here what is the case? The appellant has withdrawn the appeal preferred against a decree ex parte. So what would be the status of the application under Order 9 Rule 13? So what is the answer here? Can it be rejected? Can it be returned? Can it be maintained? Can it be referred for opinion of appellate court? As the exception provides, he can file an application, so it is maintainable, and the answer is C. It can be maintained. Okay. So I hope you are clear with these 5 concepts which I have explained today, and I would be discussing more number of questions in coming days. So if you like this video, don't forget to press like button, comment if you have any doubts, share it among your friends who are interested, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also press the bell icon for receiving regular updates and notifications regarding these type of videos. And thanks for watching.